Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, January 5th, 2022, and today we're going to be taking a look at Donald Trump's endorsement and how he actually makes these endorsements and how he has been carefully calculating and choosing who he was going to endorse for the past few election years, including this upcoming midterm year at the end of November, where we will see that Donald Trump is actually very careful about what he does. He is very picky about who he chooses to endorse, and he is not risky in the slightest bit. There are a few occasions where Donald Trump does decide to speak on an extremely important race, most notably a year ago when he spoke about the Georgia runoff elections in that state. Now, those runoff elections were never meant to be races that Democrats could have won. Looking at the historical precedent, Democrats hadn't had a Democratic senator in Georgia since the early 2000s. And looking at the incumbents, both of them, being in positions where they performed better and the Republican Party performed better in the 2020 election before Democrats officially had retained control of the House, won back control of the White House, people were expecting the runoff elections to potentially be a red wave as a way of being a check and balance on President Biden. But at that point, it simply wasn't. So besides those few and far between races, Donald Trump has actually been what I think is very smart about his endorsements. He has come into the 2022 midterm elections flaunting his win percentage rate. If you remember his press conferences back when he was the president of the United States, he would consistently say, and he mentioned this as a point to not necessarily intimidate Republicans, but show them his power. And he brought up the fact that 90% of the candidates that he endorses end up winning the general election. And I think while that was a true statistic at a period of time, and the Washington Examiner says that Trump's endorsements win 137-3, saying that, looking at the endorsement from President Trump, you look no further than that in order to figure out who will actually win a primary election or a general election. And seeing the impact of President Trump's endorsement, one might assume President Trump just really knows what he's doing, and that his endorsement means so much to these voters that he's completely changing the trajectory of these races. But that simply isn't true. I want to talk about how his endorsements in the past have been matching up compared to what we've seen historically speaking, and what they match up to today, because endorsements actually are getting a lot more risky and a lot heavier earlier on. Looking at this, I believe, research article that was published, and you can find this on a link that I will put in the description down below. They talk about how Donald Trump endorsed 75 candidates in the midterm elections, referring to 2018. And they went through and said, okay, how did they do? And in addition to this, they stacked up President Trump's win rate compared to Joe Biden, the former vice president at the time, and Senator Bernie Sanders, the runner-up in the 2016 Democratic nomination, who would later announce a bid for the presidential election in 2020. And they also chose Vice President Mike Pence, someone who seemed to have been, according to them, a bit riskier in his choices. Looking at what they have gathered, they used the partisan voting index in order to figure out which type of districts and races that President Trump was endorsing in, specifically focusing on the districts here, and how partisan they were, leaning leftward or rightward. And they found that the average PVI of the districts that Trump endorsed was 7.6, Republican plus 7.6, meaning compared to the rest of the nation, the average, which means it's a wider range but solidifies around the middle part of being the Republican plus 7.6, Donald Trump endorsed more Republican districts than he did Democratic districts for those candidates. And if you see Mike Pence, he endorsed R plus 4 in terms of the PVI. Biden endorsed only truly swing or purple districts, as they describe it, which means that Biden reserved his endorsement for very narrow races because at that time, Biden was popular. Biden was a recognizable name, and he was gearing up a 2020 presidential bid. And then Bernie Sanders stuck to only very Democratic districts with an average of Democrat plus 10. Now, Bernie Sanders' endorsement, I think, matters in a primary, but not so much in the general election. And while the same can be said for President Trump, I think that an endorsement in a Democratic-leaning district can weigh someone down, whereas a Sanders endorsement in a Republican-leaning district might be able to, but I don't think it has the same type of effect. People aren't as much anti-Bernie as they are anti-Trump. But that's a discussion for another video. But what you can see from here, and just gather straight off the bat, is that Donald Trump endorsed more Republican districts, and there's a reason for that. When you take a look at his win rate, Donald Trump had a 55% win rate in the general election when you count in the 75 House and Senate candidates in the 2018 midterm elections, and he actually performed better than Mike Pence. But that makes sense. Mike Pence endorsed less Republican districts on an overall average. Joe Biden One, he won in terms of the overall win rate here. Joe Biden had a very good result. If you take a look at the candidates who won, 38 out of 57, a better win rate than what we saw for President Trump. And same thing for Barack Obama versus Donald Trump. But what you can tell here is that in choosing these districts, Donald Trump gets a 55% win rate in the eventual outcome of the election. And while that's nowhere near 90%, it does go enough to say that Donald Trump's endorsement might actually mean something. But again, 55% isn't something that you would want to bank on. In addition to that, I think that there is a lot that went into this. I mean, sometimes Donald Trump did endorse losing candidates in strong Democratic districts. There are plenty of grifters out there that choose to run in solid Democratic districts to raise tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars in an effort to, on one hand, say, I'm challenging Nancy Pelosi. On the other hand, saying, I'm challenging Chuck Schumer. You know, whatever it might be, those grifters have always existed. They've existed before Donald Trump. They've existed through this election and will exist long after Donald Trump. But looking at the Donald Trump endorsement list, I mean, he was very careful and calculated because he wants to have this successful win rate because it gives him credibility to his name. And as everyone is expecting 2022 to have this huge impact as a result of Donald Trump being involved, you know, everyone is saying this will test Donald Trump's influence over the GOP just 2 hours ago. How Donald Trump is making the midterms a referendum on himself. How all of these things are stacking up to be President Trump, his impact on the midterms, and saying he will have equal footing to President Biden when it comes down to the midterms. Looking at the endorsements that Donald Trump has already put out, I mean, he is keeping it safe again, but he's being a bit riskier. So we'll take a look at the 2022 differences between what he's done in the past, according to FiveThirtyEight. They released this article on December 8th. I made a video on it, and you can see a lot more in-depth discussion. We'll speed run through it, and then we'll go into the actual endorsements that he's made, and then I think the pattern becomes a lot clearer once you actually do that. So, main thing that you should take away, first of all, before we get into this, is that President Trump is certainly favored by the Republican Party. Republicans want him to run for re-election, and there are many people on the Republican side that adore him. I mean, you're talking about an approval rating that is consistently 80 to 90% amongst your own party, even as the outgoing president, and actually not outgoing, but no longer the president of the United States. But as you look through the differences in the 2022 endorsements, 538's headline already declares them as earlier, bolder, and more dangerous than when he was president. Taking a look at the first thing, he's endorsing earlier than usual. If you take a look at the difference between the 2019 through 2020 election cycle, he had made a bunch of endorsements, but not nearly as many as he's doing right now. And the thing is that President Trump wants to bank on these endorsements because he needs the influence entering into 2022. Can you imagine if Donald Trump performs worse in endorsements now than he did in 2018? And the part about that is that he is undoubtedly going to perform better, but he just needs to be a bit stronger with his endorsements. If he's endorsing all of these safe candidates, people are going to see through that. The average public and the average Republican might not, simply because people don't know every single district that he endorsed in and their PVIs and things like that. But we know, and those who have the money know. That's why Donald Trump is needs to endorse more, but also needs to be more correct. It has to be a perfect situation, and 2022 seems to be shaping up to be so. You know, Donald Trump is not turning 2022 into a red wave. Republicans are doing that on their own, and President Biden is helping them. The same way that Donald Trump helped the Democratic Party turn 2018 into a blue wave year. Had Democrats stayed completely on the defense and not even moving the offense, of course, 2018 would have ended up differently. The same thing if Donald Trump had been a more approved of president. And the same thing is happening here with Joe Biden. But the perfect balance, I think what I'm trying to get at here, is that Donald Trump needs to endorse the best candidates, the boldest candidates, and the most impactful races. So he can go to the donors, he can go to the Republican Party and say, my endorsement win rate was 90% in 2022. I endorsed in all of these competitive races. It wasn't just the safe ones, but he's keeping safe ones, so he can keep them in the back pocket. He won't mention these safe ones, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But what he's doing here is that what he needs to do, at least if I was to advise President Trump on what he needs to do, he needs to get the right races. He needs to choose the right candidates through the primary, because if they lose the primary, then boom, it's a failed endorsement, right? He needs to get people who will win the general election and also the primary, which can be easy in some of these races and not necessarily the same in others. But that level of endorsement needs to happen. The strong and impactful endorsement, 100%. The second thing is that he needs to have a higher success rate. He cannot be similar to where he was before, because that similarity, that endorsement before, lost Republicans a bunch of races, especially in 2018. So he needs to come back better, build back better for his own campaign. So Looking at these endorsements that are earlier than usual, it seems that he's trying to bank on these early endorsements so they get enough energy and enthusiasm to win the primaries, and he's already made it over the first hurdle. The second thing is that he's taking more risks, as he should. He needs to take more risks. He also needs to be more correct. The good thing about 2022 is that if it does end up being a red wave, it won't be as bad for Republicans as 2018 or 2020 was, which means that the endorsements will be more correct simply because of the national environment. And as we continue down, the third thing is saying that he's endorsing down-ballot candidates, especially in election administration roles. So when you see a Trump endorsement in a Secretary of State race against someone like Brad Raffensperger, you know that they are going to win, and that's another plus for his part, and they also will eventually help him once the race comes down to those states, which is a very real possibility. And those are the three main things that they mention in this article about the main differences between his previous endorsements versus now. And we can actually see the endorsement list in just a moment. And they tell you exactly what Donald Trump is trying to do. Donald Trump is endorsing a bunch of people through 2021. I mean, you already saw the sheer amount of endorsements that we've seen already, and that was in December. It hasn't even been updated, and he has already made endorsements, even over the past week. And with these endorsements, President Trump is going to need to, again, back up his record. He also needs to have some safe races that he can keep in his back pocket, so that way, if he does end up failing, it won't end up being as much of an embarrassment as if it was a 15% win rate. Had he gone with the avenue that Joe Biden did in the 2018 midterm elections, being someone who was gearing up for a 2020 presidential bid, the next presidential bid, what Joe Biden did was only endorse in competitive races. And Joe Biden ended up doing better than Donald Trump, who chose an average of Republican +8 in terms of his district. So knowing that, Joe Biden, first of all, had an outstanding performance when it came down to those endorsements. Simply put, I mean, if you choose to endorse in all swing state races and you outperform someone who does much better in terms of choosing the safest races, I mean, those types of things are, maybe it does show the impact of an endorsement. But when you look at what Donald Trump is doing now, he isn't going through that avenue. I mean, he's not endorsing just swing state districts, because there is the possibility that he does end up with a 15% win rate, a 20% win rate, which of course is not enough to win over the Republican Party. They're not going to say, okay, we're fine with just one in every 6 competitive races based off your endorsement. I mean, that's something that they will never fly with, because they need to win back control of the United States Senate in either 2022 or 2024. The House seems to be a done deal at this point in time. But let's go through these endorsements and talk about why, what we're seeing so far is a carefully calculated and curated list of people. And there are intertwined in here some very competitive races, but generally speaking, he's going with his old strategy, except he's just adding in a few more competitive races just to differentiate the traditional type of list that he goes with. But you can see this already. In the governor elections, who has he endorsed? I want to talk about the amount of states here with Republican incumbents, because Republicans have won here as recently as 2018, and it won't be as easy in 2022. And a lot of this actually might be revenge. The Dan Cox, Jeff Deal endorsements, those are revenge against the incumbent 2 governors there. Larry Hogan can't run for governor in the state of Massachusetts, but he is in a position where maybe his endorsement would matter more if Donald Trump wasn't overbearing on the party. Looking at the incumbency status, though, the states with Republican incumbents on the governor elections is just absolutely so long. And it tells you why Donald Trump has already spoken about and endorsed in these races, because he's confident they're going to win while seemingly having a positive impact on the GOP, potentially in races they otherwise would have already won. All of these states, every single one of these states has a Republican incumbent governor except for Kansas. Texas, Maryland, Massachusetts, Alaska, Nebraska, Arkansas, Arizona, Tennessee, Idaho, South Carolina, and Georgia. Every single one of those states has a Republican incumbent governor. So Donald Trump has spoken on these races because he knows Republicans have won here before and can do it again. Maybe not necessarily in Maryland and Massachusetts, but it's entirely possible. The entire state, not possible for 2022, but it's entirely possible for the rest of them. Looking at the one race, Kansas, Derek Schmidt running against an incumbent Democrat, while Laura Kelly is not necessarily the, I guess you could say, most popular Democrat, meaning she's not reaching what other Republican governors are reaching in terms of levels of approval in Democratic states. She's still about 54-55%, which I would argue is still pretty good for a Democrat in a state like this. But the endorsement will matter, and I think the endorsement will benefit Derek Schmidt, and he could very well end up winning the general election. Looking at the Senate elections, let's talk about it. The states with Republican incumbents. Who do you have? Arkansas, Alabama, North Carolina, Idaho, Iowa, Wisconsin, Kansas, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Florida, South Carolina, and Alaska. So what do you have here? You have simply 2 states, battlegrounds, but still 2 states, Nevada and Georgia, 2 states with Democratic incumbents, meaning the remaining 12 are all Republican seats currently. And most of them, based off of our national environment right now, will go to the GOP. I think you can start to see the pattern here. While he is endorsed in competitive races like North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, these are still races you can generally end up knowing how they're going to go given our current national circumstance. The only real risks here are Georgia, Nevada, potentially Pennsylvania. Wisconsin is at this point where it could go to Ron Johnson if he chooses to announce now. There's a lot that needs to go into that race. Democrats aren't going to win Florida, and they're not going to win Iowa, and they probably won't win North Carolina, but I'm not going to count it out entirely. But the thing is, these endorsements might seem riskier, but you generally know how they're going to go. Very interesting, to say the least. He hasn't made an endorsement in Arizona. He has not made an endorsement in New Hampshire. He also has not made an endorsement in a few other states, solid red states, but those endorsements don't need to be had. But the thing is, he's lifting up on some of these endorsements potentially for a reason. And it might be because he doesn't think the GOP can win there and he doesn't want to endorse the wrong person. Or it could just be that he doesn't have someone to endorse yet. Looking at the U.S. House list, I mean, just look at the amount of incumbent seats you see here. The amount of Republicans that are incumbents that Donald Trump has endorsed, and one might argue, there haven't been primaries yet. How are you going to make this argument? But the thing is, he's already made a bunch of early endorsements. He has already put himself in a position where he is fine endorsing people ahead of primaries. There are non-incumbents on the Senate and governor list that haven't even made it through the primary process that he was already endorsed, including in the House elections. So I don't think that's truly it. Donald Trump wants his own people in the House, in the Senate, in the event that he needs them. Because, of course, if he wins the presidential election in 2024, he wants a party that's willing to work with him. And on top of that, I think it also is something to say that, Donald Trump wants to show to the GOP what his impact is, that he has had a positive and not a negative impact on their overall party standing. And that might be difficult at this point in time. If these endorsements end up firing back, it is very possible the GOP decides to roll with somebody else in 2024, even if the voters might not. There will be a coordinated takedown of him as the president, and they will probably prop up someone like Ron DeSantis, someone who they think could have a more positive impact on down ballot races. The thing about Donald Trump is that while he may have impacted the GOP beneficially in some states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and in a bunch of other rural areas across the United States, he seems to have made significant drawbacks in states such as Virginia, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, some states that used to be either solid for the GOP or leaning their way that simply aren't anymore. And that's just the reality of it all. There are going to be a bunch of pros and cons for the GOP to have Donald Trump as their 2024 nominee, and he's trying to really boost up that pro margin. That way he can have a very successful win rate and something that will be very positive for the Republican Party as they go into the next presidential election year. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.